Hello, ladies, gentlemen, gender fluid folks, and MBs. I hope you're all hanging in there, and welcome to Working Class Advocates. We are an independent socialist news media and mutual aid worker cooperative. I'm your host, Jesse Austin. Given the recent escalation of Netanyahu's ethnic cleansing campaign of the Palestinians, I feel it's important now more than ever for everyone to have a clear and demystified understanding of this so-called conflict. I'm going to address many of the common refrains we hear Israel supporters make today and share some of the key insights that ultimately led me to believe that this is indeed a genocide and we should all publicly support Palestine. Perhaps the most alarming claim we've heard is that Hamas decapitated 40 babies on October 7th. Anadolu says the Israeli military has refuted this. Another claim we're hearing several variations of is Hamas is using sexual violence as a tool, but there's at least one CNN report of sexual violence on October 7th based on unreliable eyewitness testimony and sources that had undisclosed ties to the Israeli government. This independent commission of inquiry, chaired by Navy Pillay, made a call for submissions and sent yet another request to the Israeli authorities for access to investigate the allegations of crimes, including sexual violence in Israel. But Gilad Erdan, Israel's ambassador to the UN, quickly responded on X to the Commission's announcement, tweeting, "Israel has zero trust in the anti-Semitic Commission of Inquiry." So he took the investigative board that's in charge of this and said, "No, I don't trust that board, it's anti-Semitic," and dismissed them. It sounds like it's from a cartoon, but this is real. Ambassador Gilad Erdan, see here he is on X, the Anti-Semitic Commission of Inquiry, established by the morally distorted Human Rights Council, which recently appointed Iran as chair of the council's social forum, is 100% biased against Israel. Yada yada yada, he goes on like that. It's a UN commission to investigate Hamas sexual violence. But if not the UN, who's going to do it? Because that is the global authority we go to for human rights abuses, right? Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure there will be a lot of gruesome stories that won't turn out to be false, but even if we took all of the most extreme testimonies of October 7th at face value, would that mean that the Palestinian civilian death toll in Gaza and the West Bank since then is all on Hamas's hands, every drop of blood as we're told? No, because Hamas is a self-fulfilling prophecy created by Israel. Not only was Israel fully aware of virtually every detail of the October 7th attacks a year in advance, Israel coordinates Qatari funds it knows ends up in the hands of Hamas fighters in Gaza. Netanyahu also personally sent the Mossad head and a general to convince Qatar to continue funding Hamas. This was in 2020. Here's the New York Times expose. Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. You can read that. They called it Jericho Wall. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. See, Israel has allowed suitcases holding millions in Qatari cash to enter Gaza. And then here, all Israeli media, by the way, the Times of Israel. Netanyahu sent Mossad head general to Qatar, begged it to pay Hamas. Mossad, by the way, is like the Israeli CIA. It's their intelligence agency. Top officer of the IDF. So that's the general. It wasn't just any general. It was the top officer of the IDF and the head of the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad. And either this bombing campaign in Gaza to stop Hamas and get the hostages back is just really, really, really indiscriminate, or Israel is retaliating against the UN for calling on Israel to uphold international law and human rights. One thing you'll notice a lot when you're researching this issue is that there's a lot of conflicting narratives. Mainly, you've got a lot of calling on and urging versus Israel is already doing this, that, and the other in order to ensure that it's minimizing civilian casualties. So Amnesty International, look at all of this stuff they're calling on, right? Calling on the Israeli authorities to end the unlawful attacks and abide by international humanitarian law, immediately allow unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza civilians, urgently lift its illegal blockade on Gaza, which amounts to collective punishment and is a war crime, rescind their appalling evacuation order, which has left more than 1 million people displaced, grant immediate access to the Independent Commission of Inquiry that we were talking about earlier on the occupied Palestinian territory to carry out investigations, including collecting time-sensitive evidence and testimonies. You've got Kamala Harris urging Israel to protect Gaza civilians, right? So Amnesty International calling on Israel, Kamala Harris urging Israel. And then we've got John Kirby telling us Israel is trying to minimize civilian casualties. We believe that they've been receptive to all of our messages in terms of trying to minimize civilian casualties. This, Kamala Harris said December 2nd, but we've been telling them this since October 20th. So yeah, we've been urging and calling on Israel to do this kind of stuff for a long time. Here, December 3rd, John Kirby is saying, hey, look, the IDF published an online map of places where people could go to avoid combat. There's not a whole lot of modern militaries that would do that. Aren't they so generous? Except there are no UN designated safe zones in Gaza. According to the UN, everyone who is there in Gaza says nowhere feels safe because Israel is bombing the places they said they wouldn't, like in South Gaza. No safe zones in Gaza as Israel intensifies bombings from Tighrib news agency here. 1.9 million Palestinians displaced due to Israeli war machine. And once again, no place is safe. Not there, not anywhere in Gaza. That's from UNRWA. Now, understand, Netanyahu and a great deal of those in his administration are Zionists. So we have this quote here. We're rolling out Nakba 2023, Israeli minister says on northern Gaza Strip evacuation. So you might think, what is that? What does that mean, Nakba? Well, we have this source here, Middle East Eye, and we'll run through this Nakba fact sheet really quick. So this was the first Nakba, which roughly translates to catastrophe in Arabic. The 15th of May is the annual commemoration of the Palestinian Nakba, in which 800,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their homes in 1948. They had this Partition Plan, Resolution 181, passed by the UN General Assembly. So Jews made up 31% of the population and owned 7% of the land before. This plan allocated 52% of that land to them and 45% of it to the Palestinians. The remaining 3% was to be under international control. But then you've got this where it gets pretty ugly. Plan Dalit was a strategic military plan to destroy and depopulate Palestinian population centers. The strategy was to clear Palestinian towns, villages, and cities between Jerusalem and Jaffa, to take over the coast and the northern borders of Palestine with Lebanon and Syria, and called for destruction of villages, setting fire to, blowing up, and planting mines in the debris, especially those population centers which are difficult to control continuously. Killed 15,000 Palestinians, displaced 800,000 of them, internally displaced 400,000 out of the remaining 150,000 Palestinians. The towns and villages ethnically cleansed were 418 wiped off the map. Total land controlled by Israel, 78%, so a whopping 26% more than the original plan. And land expropriated is 17,178,000 dunhams, and I did the calculation earlier. This is gonna be 4.3 million acres, and the total monetary loss estimated at between 100 billion and 200 billion in today's US dollars. And then, of course, it created lots of Palestinian refugees. 74% of today's Palestinian population is refugees. And the total number of refugees registered with the UNRWA is 5.5 million. Now, as you can see, the original Nakba here had nothing to do with getting back hostages or destroying Hamas. It was about displacing Palestinians through violent settler colonialism. Here's some of the scenes to give you a sense of the things IDF soldiers are celebrating. Israeli soldiers placed a menorah on the medical faculty of the Islamic University of Gaza in Netzarim, South Gaza City. They scratched the building's name from medical faculty and put ours now. You can see off to the left there. And then we have this man. Of course, the complete list is much longer, but here are just 3 examples of Israeli settlers employing slash and burn tactics to prevent Palestinians from reclaiming any of their land, property, and/or livestock. 1. Israeli settlers burn Palestinian crops in Hebron, southern West Bank. That's June 2023. 2. Illegal Israeli settlers destroy crops in Masafir. That's in August 2023. And 3. Israeli settlers destroy whole crop of olive trees and burn Palestinian farms. And this was most recently, but as you can see, it was still just before the October 7th attack on Israel. Now, I don't know about you folks, but something tells me that if this were any other country that wasn't such a powerful ally of the United States, then these acts of settler violence would rightfully be viewed as hate crimes. From Human Rights Watch, I would have put this front and center, except I thought that white phosphorus was a chemical weapon. It turns out it's not technically classified as a chemical weapon, but it's still an extremely brutal incendiary munition which sticks to your skin and continues to burn, so I believe it's worth raising the alarm over. And it's not just Human Rights Watch concerned about white phosphorus. I first heard the news from Amnesty International. See evidence of Israel's unlawful use of white phosphorus in southern Lebanon. They're saying the same thing. Down here, see the body of evidence reviewed by Amnesty International indicates that Israel has used white phosphorus smoke artillery shells during an attack on the southern border town of Daira, a populated civilian area. So that's why they're so outraged. So this is the situation between Israel and Palestine. Israel is an apartheid state. The people in Gaza suffer. The people in the West Bank suffer. The children who throw rocks at Israeli tanks get arrested and go to jail. And in the midst of all this, one who is still stuck on the fence might wonder why there are so many ardent pro-Israel voices out there. Why exactly are there so many weasels like John Fetterman running around defending Israel at every step of the way? And that's when we take a visit over here to Open Secrets. Thanks to the PSL Pittsburgh here, they made this helpful infographic that shows that Fetterman himself took $244,100 to be a pro-Israel mouthpiece. Now, over at Open Secrets, when you select all cycles, all senators for pro-Israel money to Congress, you get this big long list. And quite pathetically, John Fetterman is all the way at the bottom, guys. He's second to last. There he is, way at the bottom there, with his $244,100. So pretty cheap to buy John Fetterman, but he's not the only one. Look at all of our well-known, infamous folks here. Tom Tillis, Sam Brownback, all these recognizable names, right? Marsha Blackburn. Who else we got? Barack Obama. There you go. There's Barack Obama's Israel money. Joe Manchin, Elizabeth Warren, Deb Fisher. You've got Tim Scott, Rick Santorum. There's Mark Kelly, there's Chuck Grassley, Tim Kaine, Amy Klobuchar, Dianne Feinstein, Susan Collins, Harry Reid. Here's Cory Booker, John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, Dick Durbin, David Perdue, Ron Wyden, Ted Cruz, John McCain, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Joe Lieberman, Hillary Clinton, and look who we have here at the top of the list. It's our very own President Joe Biden, with a whopping $4,346,264 from the pro-Israel lobby. That's a lot of money. Why would the American Israel Public Affairs Committee want Joe Biden to have all that money? What political position could they be paying him to have? Well, I'll show you. It's a position Biden's had for a long time. I believe since the 80s. Let's take a look.
It's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. Israel is the single greatest strength America has in the Middle East. I always say to my friends when they say those things to you, I say, imagine our circumstance in the world were there no Israel. How many battleships would there be? How many troops would be stationed? You know, I used to say,
Early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
What are the chances of a Gaza ceasefire? None. No possibility. So the President, any update on getting hostages out? We're still optimistic. So the hostages in Gaza, what's the delay in getting...
Now, if there's any doubt left in your mind whether this is ethnic cleansing or collective punishment, I'd like to leave you with this quote from the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He says, "If it, Hezbollah, makes this kind of mistake here, the ones who will pay the price will be first and foremost Lebanese citizens. What we're doing in Gaza, we can also do in Beirut." I don't think he means that we can also rescue hostages in Beirut or defeat Hamas in Beirut. He's saying the Lebanese citizens are going to pay the price. Equipped with everything we've learned here today, we're now prepared to reveal the subtext of and effectively disarm these popular Zionist refrains. Does Israel have a right to exist? Yeah, sure. Israel can exist. Lots and lots and lots of Jews can live there. No one has a problem with that. They have a problem with the apartheid regime. They have a problem with the checkpoints making it impossible for Palestinians to go about their daily lives. They have a problem with the settler colonial project that is happening in the West Bank, where these Israeli settlers are violently driving out Palestinians who bought and paid for their land. So this is one area where the right-wingers, the Zionists, don't support property rights. So keep that in mind next time these people want to tell you about property rights and how you should support property rights. They don't defend property rights for Palestinians. Does Israel have a right to defend itself? Yes. Although there are some critics of Israel's Iron Dome, like Jewish Currents here for example, for the most part, what people are critical of Israel for is not the Iron Dome, but for bombing of Gaza and for continued settlement project in the West Bank. Very rarely these days are we hearing, hey, Netanyahu has to shut down his Iron Dome. We're hearing, Netanyahu, please stop bombing Gaza. And what is the subtext? The subtext of this one is, does Israel have a right to ramp up and escalate its settler colonial project and bombing in Gaza every time there's a Hamas terrorist attack? That's what they mean by defend itself. No, Israel doesn't have a right to do that. Sorry. And then we have this one. Hamas is using Palestinian children as human shields. The United States made a similar argument during the Vietnam War, and history has not looked back kindly on that argument. Even the architect of the Vietnam War admits now that it was a mistake, and the United States in so many ways now acknowledges itself as the villain of the Vietnam War. You may or may not know that the Al-Shifa tunnels were indeed built by Israel. Now, regardless of who built the tunnels, if I were a Palestinian civilian and there are bombing campaigns happening constantly and I hear the sirens going off, I am running to the nearest tunnel and I don't care who built it. Here are two sources from 2004 describing 13-year-old Mohammed Saeed Essa. Netanyahu is often referred to as Israel's Trump, and Mohammed happened to be protesting the building of an annexation wall. When the IDF soldiers found Mohammed, they tied his arm to the windscreen and used him as a human shield to deter his friends from throwing rocks at the Jeep. I would say that's cruel and excessive punishment. Here's another example from 2014 of 17-year-old Ahmad Abu Raida, who was captured and forced to search for tunnels for 5 days. And it looks like the IDF soldiers that they do hold accountable aren't really given that stern of a punishment. It's more like a slap on the wrist. Apparently, these IDF soldiers that were caught using a Palestinian child as a human shield in 2008 were given an inadequate punishment according to Human Rights Watch. Do you condemn Hamas? Yes. Furthermore, I condemn Qatar and Netanyahu for funding and propping up Hamas, because without them, Hamas would not be able to wreak a fraction of the amount of terror that they've been able to on October 7th and throughout their history. And finally, if we end the blockade and pursue a peaceful one or two state solution, how do you intend to prevent Islamic terrorism in Israel towards Jews? I'll give the benefit of the doubt that there is no subtext to this one, and this is an honest, good faith question. And the answer to it is, drumroll please, use the intelligence that Mossad worked so painstakingly hard to collect. Right? This concludes our program for this evening. For Working Class Advocates, I'm Jesse Austin. Workers of the world unite. I love you all and have a good night.